Oh, hello! My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. So this is sort of an out-of-the-box video, for me at least. So I think I've mentioned on here before that I grew up in a very conservative religious context, and because of that, I was always very much like warned away from anything having to do with like magic or like astrology, any of that kind of stuff. And it's not that I necessarily believe in that stuff now, but I have enjoyed, since being kind of like liberated from a more restrictive mindset, just having like fun exploring some of that stuff. And one of the things that I've been doing is kind of exploring astrology a little bit, and I don't know, I know a lot of people really enjoy that, so I thought, like, you know what, like, I don't feel like I'm gonna go to hell for looking into this anymore, so why not have some fun with it? So I am a Cancer sun, and part of why I was like not into astrology prior to now was because I was like, oh, well, like, yeah, there's some things about Cancer that I resonate with, but like, not totally. But it turns out you also need to know your moon sign and your rising sign. So I am a Cancer sun, a Virgo moon, and a Sagittarius rising. And when I did like a little reading, and when she explained like what that means, I was like, oh, so that's like, that is me. That doesn't mean astrology is real, but for me, it's fun. It has some descriptive power, and I've been having fun playing with it. So anyway, all that being said, I thought that I would do some book recommendations. The sun sign that is now in dominance. So I just thought it might be kind of fun to play with this a little bit, and I had fun thinking up some books that might go with the Cancer sign. So let's get into some cancerous, isn't that just like the fucking worst in terms of names? Anyway, some cancerous book recommendations. Okay, so number one is that the planet associated with Cancer is Moon. So I was trying to think of a couple of books that had to do with the moon. Now, one that I'm in the middle of and like keep not picking up, and that probably should tell you something, that is set entirely on the moon, is Artemis by Andy Weir, but I've not finished that yet, so I didn't want to recommend it. Instead, I thought I would mention a book that I read a couple of weeks ago that I really enjoyed, and I don't think I've mentioned on this channel, which was 6 Wakes by Mur Lafferty. Now, most of it takes place like in space, but there are some characters who are essentially like colonists from the moon, so I thought that might be appropriate, and it is basically like a sci-fi murder mystery. I don't think it's anything like revolutionary, but it was really enjoyable, so I recommend that for my moon pick. And then Cancer is kind of known as like the mothering sign, so it has a lot to do with like the home and relationships and like kind of the protectiveness of home. But anyway, in terms of like the mothering and home part, I thought I would start with some like good examples of that and maybe some bad. So in terms of like an instinct to protect the home and have sort of like a mothering vibe gone a little bit bad, I would say is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. So the main character in this is a butler of a grand house, and he kind of I think he sees himself essentially as like the protector of that house and of the people in it, and at the expense of himself, which is something that like is often sort of cited as like a Cancer weakness, is that you are too worried about like the people you're trying to mother and not enough about yourself. So I thought Stevens might be a good example of that. And then like on the converse, like something that I think or a book or a series that I think does a great job of sort of exploring like the value of community and home and having a really strong sense of like family and protectiveness of your family is the Side Changeling series from Nalini Singh. I think especially the pack dynamics in these books, like it really, I think, a part of what people really love about these books, aside from like some, you know, the romance and like the big like political machinations, people really love like the family environments in this, and like it's definitely like, oh, if only we all had like communities who treated each other this way. So I think kind of like a good and bad mothering pick here. Another pick I have is The Hobbit, because I think part of like what they advise, like part of what they talk about with Cancer in terms of like taking something that could be a weakness and making a strength is this idea that like you can be very like home oriented and insular, but that can also like be a basis for you to go out and like do good things in the world. And I think that that's totally what The Hobbit is about. Like Bilbo is like little stick in the mud, wants to stay at home, but it's sort of like his love for his home that I think like gives him the character and the strength that he needs to get through his adventure. And the same in the Lord of the Rings. Like, you know, I think there's definitely a huge kind of theme about like saving the Shire, and like it's completely against the nature of the hobbits to do what they're doing, but ultimately they do what they do for the Shire and their like, and to protect their home. So I thought this might also be a good kind of home pick. So another thing that they kind of say about Cancer is like there's like a huge part of, if you're reading like characteristics of Cancer, is always like, you're so emotional, you're so moody, you're so whatever. And like, I guess I somewhat resonate with, like, I am an emotional person, but the way, the reason why I never fully identified with Cancer until like I understood that it was supposed to be rounded out by your rising and your moon sign is that like, yes, I am actually a very emotional person, and I am kind of a homebody. Like, there are definitely things in Cancer that I resonate with, but anyway, they would talk about like, you are ruled by your emotions, you're always emotional. And I think what I now understand is that like, it doesn't have to be what rules you. It's just that like, Cancers feel their feelings. And that can, in a negative context, lead to like moodiness in theory. So I kind of picked a gradient of emo-ness here. So Wuthering Heights, I think, is a great example of like an emotional Cancer-y like vibe gone bad, because like, oh my gosh, the feelings in this book. And they're also very insular and very protective of like this sort of like like kind of an us and them type dynamic that I think is not necessarily super healthy. But anyway, so like, I think this is kind of like extreme, like maybe bad emotional. I think like I think The Catcher in the Rye is kind of in the middle, because like, especially with the ending and sort of like how Holden like feels about Phoebe, like I think that there's some really good like kind of protective instincts here, but I also think that Holden is like too emotional for this world basically, and that's kind of how he ends up in the situations he is in. And then finally, I thought Gilead is a great example of sort of like working through, like, this is a very emotional book, but I think in a really positive context, and like using your emotions to like become a better person and like have empathy for other people. And I also think that the narrator in this has like, he's a pastor and he's like an old man, but he actually, I think, has a very mothering energy. So I actually felt like this was a very like Cancerian, I don't know what the adjectival form of this is, but this felt like very Cancer energy to me. Another thing that they say about Cancer is that Cancers can be kind of unpredictable because they are kind of moody in theory. And I thought what I would do is pick a book that I think is pretty unpredictable, The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins, but I think in a really positive way. I think that the unpredictability of this book is part of what makes it super good. And I feel like there's also a lot of like home issues in this book. Like, a lot of this basically boils down to like daddy issues, but like writ large. So anyway, I felt like this also kind of had some of that unpredictability, but like in a way that I think unpredictable can kind of be a neutral value. So I thought that was appropriate. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was that part of what like the physical representation of Cancer is supposed to be associated with are breasts and stomach, which makes sense because it's like the mother stuff. I assume that it's mother because the moon traditionally is associated with women, like because of like periods and stuff. I don't know. I didn't look into that deeply. But anyway, all that to say, the physical traits that are associated with Cancer are breasts and stomach, and also this idea of like food and nourishment. So I thought I would pick a couple of things. One is, for the breast aspect, is Come As You Are, The Surprising New Science That Will Transform Your Sex Life by Emily Nagoski. First of all, the pun of the title and also the visual pun on this is on point. So kudos to whoever was in charge of those things. This is like, if you are a woman or you are someone who has sex with women, I recommend this book. I think this does a really nice job of explaining, like, it gets into a lot of topics, but I think that this is a really great kind of scientific exploration of how women's sexuality and sexual desire work, and like sexual parts work. This also gave me a lot of, this has been very helpful for me as a friend, because I am somewhat how to say this in a very delicate way. I am not a stereotypical woman when it comes to sexual desire. That has never been a problem for me. But I know a lot of women like kind of struggle to kind of figure out how to get themselves, you know, going and interested and having like a positive sex life. So I think this has made me a better friend, and like I've given this to people and they've been like, this was really helpful. I think this has a lot of really helpful science and also a lot of really helpful advice. I also really like, sorry, I'm talking about this more than I thought I would, but I really like the metaphor in here that everybody's sexuality is essentially a garden that is filled with things when you receive it. So like from your family or from culture or from like biology or from religion, like all these things we get. And then once we hit puberty, the garden is sort of turned over to us and we have to figure out how to like tend to it and deal with it. And I thought that was a really helpful metaphor because I think it alleviates some of the like, I didn't choose this-ness of it, of like, yeah, you like some of our sexual hangups, like we don't get to choose. I grew up in a super fundamentalist context. I have plenty of those. But I didn't choose them and now I just have to deal with them. So I thought that was a really helpful metaphor. I do think that this is like a really helpful book. And like I said, if you are a woman, if you identify as a woman, or if you are having sex with women, I think all of those would be people who would benefit from reading this. And then finally, a couple of books about eating / food / nourishment because of the stomach stuff. So I picked Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It by Gary Taubes. You guys have heard me raving about this for coming up on a year now, so I won't say much more about it. And then My Life in France by Julia Child. This is my all-time favorite memoir. I absolutely adore this book. It is beautifully written and the way she talks about food is just like, it feels like it's a love story with her husband. Oh my God, they are adorable. So there's that, but it also is just like a love story with food and with France. So this is amazing. So I think that will do it for my kind of cancer recommendations here. This is sort of like a weird, I feel a little weird about this because like I said, I just grew up so conservative and like, I'm also somebody who thinks of themselves as pretty scientific. So like, it's not that I like fully believe in all this stuff. But I think it's interesting to explore, and I have found, at least for me, that there is some descriptive power in some of the things it talks about. I would be very interested, by the way, if anybody knows of any papers that have been done on this, like if there's any, like if there's been any exploration scientifically of astrology and like trends of people who are born at certain times, mostly just because like anytime there's some like kind of like ancient threads, I'm always interested in like where people got that. Like sometimes it's just out of whole cloth, whatever. But like, for instance, like kosher laws, like a lot of that probably derives from the fact that like pork in a pre-industrial context was like a rather risky thing to eat. Like the things that are forbidden in terms of like what you're supposed to eat on kosher, like a lot of that parallels like, hey, like those things are things that could easily make you sick. So like that's where some of those like religious beliefs came from. So yeah, anyway, I would be curious to see if there's any like, if there is any kind of like received wisdom potentially from astrology. Anyway, that's a total tangent. This is a little bit different, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I always love different ways to have like kind of lists of books, so hopefully you like that too. Anyway, I'm rambling at this point. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And let me know, you know, if you're a Cancer, if you agree with any of these picks. So yeah, I think that will do it. Hope you're having a great day and I will talk to you later. Bye.